Welcome back to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest is Patty Hadju with Shelterhouse. Patty, we were just, before the break, we're talking about some of those fundamental pieces of why some people are successful in society and others less successful. And we were really talking about the issue of how much control a person has over the choices they make on a daily basis in their lives. You were just referring to a study you were just reviewed.
Well, because power is a dynamic, you're right, that influences all kinds of things at all different levels of society. And one of the things that I had read along my journey is the risk of having people in high power positions. You were referring to the Whitehall study, which I'm familiar with, but the risk of having people in high positions of power with very low status, and what a danger that is. And actually, this study was done after there were some things that happened, I guess, in one of the wars that the United States was involved in, where there were frontline sort of infantry soldiers that were extremely abusive to a prisoner. And so this study evolved from observing some of that dynamic. And so one way to alleviate that is to improve the ability to recognize people for what they're doing and for the value that they're bringing to the organization. And so that's one of the things that we've been working with our staff on, is recognizing them for the work that they're doing, improving their capacity to have control and input into policy decisions that we're making and changes and approaches, and even looking at including them in some of the sort of case management stuff that we're doing, so that we can acknowledge the value that they bring to the organization and improve that sort of decrease that risk, I guess, of using power that someone holds when they're determining entry, for example, at -40. Decrease the risk that power would be used in a negative way.
Well, let's explore that a little bit further around staff, because I've been in the world of nonprofits and providing service for vulnerable people for some time, and one of the things you see is that the staff providing frontline service are sometimes under tremendous pressure. And sometimes they don't really have the support, or they don't have the opportunity to let off that steam that's building up, because they feel justifiably upset about how this person is being treated, but they don't really have the power to change those functions. Let's just start with how big is the staff at Shelterhouse?
We have about 60 staff now
60?
in total. Yeah.
Whoa, that's a major employer in the city.
So 24 full-time equivalents, essentially. So some people don't realize that the economic benefit that we provide to the community and to the neighborhood in general. With that many staff, of course, people are buying things in the neighborhood and contributing to the economy. And so I think that's the piece of conversation around Shelterhouse that sometimes gets left out, that we are an employer. And we're an employer for people that are starting off in their career. So the wages at the front lines for the frontline staff are not that high.
And like many nonprofits, they're not really
a lot of room to negotiate. They're not recognized
by dollars.
That's right. I mean, we have an unsecured sort of funding commitment of about $1 million a year. Now, that doesn't include the amount that we get from the city, but that funding is not what we consider secure forever funding. It's something that we have to reapply for on a periodic basis and advocate for, and those kinds of things. And so, our fundraising commitment is 34% of our total budget, and it just keeps on going up. And so, so our capacity to pay, competitive salaries and attract people that are making good money in other organizations is pretty diminished based on just sort of our economic landscape. And so we try to compensate for that in other ways. And some of the ways that we do that is by making sure that people have access to training. And we have a small education bursary now. So if someone wants to continue on in their studies, we will provide, it's not obviously the full tuition, but we'll provide a bursary towards that. We send staff to professional development opportunities in the community. We have regular staff meetings where people can sort of air their concerns. We've made a commitment to 24-hour supervision. That was a really big piece. It's a bit expensive, but because there's so many what I call gray decisions, where there are so many factors and the risk is actually quite high if you make the wrong decision, we thought we needed to support our frontline staff in a more comprehensive way. So we made this commitment to 24-hour supervision. We've invested in a number of sort of physical features to improve improve safety concerns that staff had around access to the building and equipment that might be malfunctioning, and even just ongoing training around nonviolent conflict resolution. And so we've worked really closely with the union. It is a unionized environment, to make sure that we're all on the same page around the primary driving factor in the organization is the safety and wellness of the staff, because it's difficult work that they do.
And so, I mean, here you've got 60 odd folks who are trying to help folks who are really at the bottom of our social scale and economic scale to live as healthy a life as possible and move out of that that trap in a way. So how do you empower them to do that? I mean, it's a challenging job.
And so we talk a lot about compassion fatigue and what the notion of vicarious trauma, which is when you're traumatized by hearing or seeing other people's trauma. And we acknowledge that it's a hard job and that there's an emotional load to that job. And we place a real high degree of emphasis on the need for balance. And we monitor people to make sure they're not taking on too much overtime, or they're not, we have some rules and policies in place around not hanging out at Shelterhouse when you're not working, because there's a compulsivity sometimes to this work. It doesn't just stop when you leave, and you might be drawn to it in some cases because of a whole bunch of reasons. And so we have some safeguards in place to make sure people aren't spending too much time in that environment, and that they're taking the breaks that they need to take, and that and they're taking their days off, and they're not engaging in that work.
I'm just wondering if you'd be my supervisor and tell me to take a day off now and again.
Happy to do that. Yeah. I think it's really important when you're working in a really sort of dramatic environment, and like Shelterhouse, where there is it's ongoing, adrenaline provoking work. People are in crisis, people are upset, people are traumatized, you're never bored. And so there's this compulsion that can develop around, having to be there, and that, I need to check in on this thing, or this thing is happening. And so we really work to make sure that people set limits for themselves, and that we monitor staff as well, that they're taking the breaks that they need.
And what kind of turnover do you have among staff? Is it?
Yeah, it's getting better. It's funny, we kind of attract a bunch of different types of employees. We attract people that maybe are looking for something part-time and casual, that they maybe don't want to work full-time for a variety of reasons. We do attract a lot of young or even older adults that are, recently graduated from post-secondary program. We're a really good sort of starting job for people going into social services or police foundations or any of those kinds of helping programs. So we often get recruits that are students on placement that then apply for a job and really understand kind of what they're getting themselves into. And so what we have done over the last 2 years is we've actually increased our commitment to our employees. So we have a small pension plan. It's a matching pension plan, obviously not defined benefit, but it's something. We have more full-time positions that then of course have benefits attached. So there's, we've made more of a commitment to the staff, and we're seeing less of a turnover. The challenge really is those casual positions, and we need those. We need those for when people call in sick, when people can't make it for one reason or another, we have to actually have casual staff. And so that's the harder pool to maintain, just because we're not guaranteeing them hours and they're not guaranteeing us hours. And so it's just trying to hit that balance of how many people do we need on this list that makes sure we can fill the shifts that we need to fill.
All right, Patty, we're going to take a short break. We'll be back in just a minute. Please stay with us.